Check, check, 1, 2. Hope you like a little country, some rock and roll and blues, 'cause we sure love playing for good people like you. Let me know if you can hear me. Check, check, 1, 2.
Welcome to Music Local and Sustainable, the radio show that features discussions with and the music of local musicians. I am your host, Dave Lake. Tonight, we have in the studio Ricardo Ochoa, best known as the fiddle player for the band Velvet Caravan, but he's also a classical violinist for the Savannah Philharmonic and a composer and arranger. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. Welcome, Ricardo Ochoa.
Thank you, Dave. Good to see you.
How did you become a classical violinist?
That's a very long answer. I guess it was before I was born. I mean, I came from a family of musicians, and my father was a classical guitarist in Venezuela, very well known in that world. I was a professor, a director of different conservatories. When I was born into that, and I was, from a very young age, hanging out with musicians and students, and at conservatories. When I was after school, I would have to go with him to his place of work, and I did all the training that a little kid could do, have kindergarten music and all that stuff, and eventually started doing music lessons and music classes, but nothing related to the violin. Basically, by the time I picked up the violin at age 8, I already knew how to write and read music, and had some basic information and sight singing and all that stuff, and in harmony.
Now, did that occur in school?
No, that was after school programs in conservatories. Growing up in Venezuela, it's just a whole nother type of education system. It's more the European system of music, not so much in school, but it's certainly an after school program. So that all happened at a very early age, and I felt like I was born into music. It's not a conscious decision. My father never pushed me to pick up the instrument or any instrument. So one day, after watching a commercial for cooking oil that had the music for Fiddle in the Roof, I decided to become a violinist. I came to my dad and I say, I want to play the violin. And the next day, the next day, I had a violin and a teacher. So he was basically waiting for me to call the instrument. And then the rest was study. And he made sure that I practiced every day and had the best teachers available and possible. And he died when I was young, but I just continued with it, was in love with it. And got really serious. At the age of 13, I knew that was what I wanted to do for a living. And at the age of 15, I became a professional musician in Venezuela and continued to train and do my best effort to be able to move to the U.S. to continue my education. And
you say at 15 you became a professional musician.
I was studying with the principal second of the Venezuelan Philharmonic Orchestra.
For those who don't know, a principal second is what?
So you have in an orchestra different sections. You have the first violin section, the second violin section, the viola section, and the cello section. Of course, the bass section. That's on the strings. The second violin is just another voice, just like the first violins would have a voice. In an orchestra, you have about 24 violinists. So 12 are usually the first violin, 12 would be the second violins. Principal second is that one that leads the second violin section. My teacher was the principal second of the Venezuelan Philharmonic, and they were conducting auditions for 3 openings at that time. And he wanted me to audition for the orchestra so I can get a job as a sub. So once in a while they would need me, I would do it. I was in high school at the time, so he just wanted me to audition for the experience. So I auditioned and I won the job. So I became the youngest musician in the orchestra, and it was a little bit controversial. They didn't want to give me the job because I was too young, but I also won the job, meaning that I played just as well as everybody else. And so I quit high school, and I finished high school in one of those night schools. And so I was finished high school very early in my life and continued to prepare musically to move to New York and do my graduate work at Queens College.
So as a teenager, you actually moved into the Venezuelan Philharmonic and not into Simón Bolívar.
The Simón Bolívar, yeah, that's a professional orchestra too, but they do have student orchestras attached to the Simón Bolívar. That's part of El Sistema, which is a great system of music education down there. I was never within that group. I kind of was parallel to all that. Never wanted to really be part of it. But yeah, so I moved into a professional orchestra immediately. I was surprised. I mean, I remember my very first week of work, and this is every week for 45 weeks a year. So it's a full-time job. And I remember walking into the first rehearsal and didn't have much time to prepare for that rehearsal, but it was Mahler's second that I had to play. And I mean, I was overwhelmed. Not only because it's amazing music, but it's because the first time playing that size of work. Coming from playing in small student orchestras, and all of a sudden, I didn't know what I was getting into. But I adapt pretty quickly and work really hard. Get there.
Were you in the first or second violin section?
And the second violin section. I was in the back of the section.
Well, you were a new player.
Oh, yeah. And then, of course, there's some kind of discrimination against young people. But it's okay. I didn't mind. I was getting paid just as much as the guy in the first chair in the section. So I don't care.
Or at least as much as the person next to the principal.
Well, I was making so much money, I didn't know what to do with it. I mean, that was for a kid. I was making all of a sudden just as much money as my mom, who was a professional psychologist. And I was like, all right, what do I do? Well, just went and bought myself some new surfboards and went to the beach a lot and enjoyed my teenage years pretty well. Yeah.
As a professional musician at the Philharmonic of Venezuela, how much did you have to practice on your own? And then how much were there rehearsals, performances, say, during an average week or month?
Well, this was a while ago. So let me see if I can remember. I remember practicing a lot, obviously. I was really into it. So I would definitely put in my own practicing time, personal, by myself, locked in my room. I would put 6 to 7 hours a day. There were sometimes double rehearsals, but a rehearsal was a 3-hour service. And they happen every day. So we have 1 day a week we had off. Monday was the day off, and concerts were on Sunday. We had rehearsal every day from Tuesday, basically all through Sunday. And I practice every day. It's a lot of work, and not only had to study for me to develop better as a musician, but also I had to study the music for the orchestra because I had to have it ready by rehearsal number 1, and that's a lot of work when you are confronted with a symphony like Mahler or Tchaikovsky or any of that stuff, plus an overture and a concerto. So that stuff takes time. I would practice a couple hours a day, just that music. The rest will be my scales and such and all that stuff. So yeah, it's a lot of work, and then having to go to finish my high school and at night, to put some hours in there too. So it's not like hey, I got a job and jump. No, I ended working more than when I was in high school. It's like, oh man, high school was easy,
There was a new repertoire every week?
Yeah, a new repertoire every week. And of course, then you have anticipated the work that you're doing next week. So in week 1, you were practicing what you were going to play in week 2 and week 3. And it was always like that. And it's kind of like that with the big orchestras anyway. They even, orchestras like Pittsburgh and New York Philharmonic, they start rehearsing work that they're going to do the week after, even though they're doing the concerts that week. It's a lot of studying, and of course these people, most of them teach too, so it's a lot of work.
And so why did you want to come to the United States?
I was 15 years old, and I was looking at the musicians that were around me. They had been doing it for 40 years, 50 years. So I didn't want to just do that for the rest of my life. I wanted to move on. I want to move on to a better environment, not only musically, but we all know that the living situation there is not good, and I sort of foresaw that in the 80s when I was there. I just needed to get out of there. I knew that I wasn't going to raise my family there. I knew that I wanted to become a better musician, and at that point I was just, I need a better teacher. And even my teacher at the time was like, you need to go study with Margaret Pardee in this case in New York City. She's your next step. That's what I pushed for. I just needed to progress.
So when you moved to New York, you continued to play music and study music and also get a university degree.
Right. I went to Queens College and I did my undergrad work in there, and I studied violin under Margaret Pardee first, and then Daniel Phillips, who is a fantastic violinist and
violist.
And violist, yeah.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with his work
Yeah.
because he is one of the performers at Spoleto
Yeah.
on a regular basis. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's my guru. He's a fantastic person and really taught me how to play the way I play now. At that time, it was all classical stuff. I was focusing on being an orchestra musician. That's what I loved the most, was classical music and orchestral music. Was my passion.
Why orchestral music and not chamber music or becoming a soloist?
I honestly didn't think that I had it as a soloist. Not only it requires a certain type of person, but also a lot of work. And even though I do put a lot of work into it, the competition is very, very tough for that. I did do a couple of competitions, did well, didn't win anything, but felt like I did well. However, it's just the orchestral thing was the community effort to make music is what always attracted me the most. And it's just the repertoire is amazing. And when it's performed and delivered the right way, the sound is unbelievable. I love chamber music. I love the dynamics of chamber music. And I consider what I do with Velvet Caravan be chamber music. I very much consider that chamber music, even though we're doing gypsy crazy stuff. At the time, but that was my passion. Not so much anymore, to be honest, And even though I play in a fantastic orchestra here in Savannah, it's not my first passion anymore. Training as an orchestra musician in college was good, but I also started training Baroque performance, which is a completely different way of playing violin. It's a completely different instrument. You're dealing with gut strings instead of metal strings, and the shape of the instruments is slightly different. The bow is definitely different. It's not balanced the same way, and it gives you a different tone, and also the intonation is different. You're not dealing with an A that is A440. You're dealing with different A's, so your intonation can be lower if you're playing French music, be higher if you're playing German music. So the A is different intonation-wise. And then the distance between notes can be different. Like we have, the way piano is that you get the octaves and the fifths are perfect and the fourths are perfect. And the thirds and sixths are relative. But in Baroque music, it's a different system of tuning, so where the thirds and the sixths are perfect, which means that as you go up in pitch, your octaves become further apart. So it's an interesting way of playing. So that's a way of developing your ear completely different. But I also learned how to play the violin with a lot more freedom. I got rid of that shoulder rest that everybody has. I just pick up the violin and start playing, and that allowed my neck to be more flexible. But the way of playing is just so much nicer and pure sound, not so much vibrato, that huge vibrato that is kind of resembling the singers, opera singers. No, it's more like talking with the instrument instead.
You're listening to Music Local and Sustainable, and I'm your host, Dave Lake. Tonight, we have in the studio Ricardo Ochoa. So you did original Baroque performance.
Baroque performance, historically accurate, which I had to study a lot more of the environment around Baroque music. I actually ended studying dance. In the 17th century, 18th century, everybody danced. That's how you socialize. So you have to learn the minuet, the bourrée, all these social dances. And I did it just for posture reasons, to learn how to... But I also did fencing, historic fencing. So I learned how to fence in Spanish, Italian, and French style. And that's the old pre-modern fencing, of course. That was a lot of fun because, I was in full gear. That was fun too, but that also helped me learn the culture that is surrounding that music.
In the true Baroque style, performing the true Baroque style with true Baroque instruments, using true Baroque tuning, compared to Baroque music that you'd hear an average symphony orchestra doing a Bach piece.
Mm-hmm.
How does that differ?
Well, I think the first difference that you hear, the sound of the strings, the metal strings, they resonate differently. And the interpretation, there's a lot of modern orchestras that are trying to be a little bit more conscious about their Baroque performance, because there's obviously so many discussions about Baroque performances, and there's no audio that we can base that on, because it's only treatises that they're on how to play the instrument that we have, documents and reports of how people played. And that is controversial on its own, because it's an interpretation of whatever this guy who wrote this treatise is. But again, sometimes the person that wrote the treatise might not be the best, the authority on it, you know? So even that might not be accurate. So there's a lot of different interpretations. What happens with modern orchestras is that they seem to have the same sort of interpretation. I guess I compare it going to a Hollywood movie and see a beautiful movie that is gorgeous, but it has nothing to do with historic reality. Movie about the pilgrims that came to the United States and everybody has perfect teeth or perfect hair. That's a comparison that I can make of playing Bach. Orchestra will make it as stylized as possible. Where Baroque musicians will make a conscious effort to make it as true historic as possible, which makes it a lot more fun because they take risks. They take risks with the sounds, with the volumes, dynamics, that is, and then little interpretations on melodies and tempos and things like that. So it makes it a little more risque and more human, I think.
Is there a good recorded example of original type performance?
My favorite example would be the Vivaldi Four Seasons is what everybody maybe recognized the most as a Baroque piece, and it's just so popular. There is a group recording from the 80s, from an Italian group, El Giardino Armonico, which is the harmonic garden of the Four Seasons, and the album cover is fantastic. It's a bullet going through a violin, making the violin explode. And if you hear this, the Four Seasons, and that's exactly how it feels. The first time I heard that recording was just like, wow, I couldn't believe that you could do that. I mean, it really sounded like a rock band playing the Four Seasons. And that was my first like reality check when it came down to listening to Baroque performers doing it right. The amount of sound that they got out of the instruments and the power they got, I don't think you can do with a modern instrument. And it was fantastic. And that's one that I highly recommend for people to listen to, that recording of the Four Seasons. It never gets old for me.
And then just any symphony orchestra performance of the Four Seasons would be the good comparison.
Oh, I try not to listen to them. Good thing about the Four Seasons, it's called programmatic music. So it's describing a scene, it's describing things. So in these descriptions, they are in the second movement, the spring, is about a shepherd taking a nap. And there is the wind slightly moving around him, very, very nice. And then there is his dog barking. So when you hear a regular orchestra do it, the barking comes from the principal violist. A modern orchestra would do it this way. Boom, 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 boom. Well, I don't know whose dog barks like that. So if you hear this recording with El Gardino Armonico, you will hear a real loud bark. Then you have this beautiful melody, you know, it's the shepherd dreaming, being interrupted constantly by the barking. But it's in the background, you know, the guy is asleep completely, but his dog is barking. In order to make that happen, and in your mind, or to make as an audience member, you really have to come up with something that is more vulgar. And a dog barking, they do it very well. So that's what Baroque music is about. It's about describing and about really going in deep into the explanation of what they're doing. Modern orchestras, they just want something beautiful and stylized.
You're listening to WRUU-LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul. If your business enjoys the programming on WRUU-LP, please support the station with a donation. Let your customers, neighbors, and friends know that you share our vision of building a thriving economy based on a diverse and vibrant community. Our listeners will know you support Savannah's only broad-based community radio station. Become a tower sponsor or underwriter. To check out the levels of corporate sponsorship and to donate, go to www.wruu.org/corporate. Again, to check out the levels of corporate sponsorship and to donate, go to www.wruu.org/corporate. Thank you for listening to and supporting WRUU LP. You're listening to Music Local and Sustainable, and I'm your host, Dave Lake. Tonight, we have in the studio Ricardo Ochoa. That's what I get out of the Velvet Caravan. That same sort of communication, that same sort of excitement, that same sort of trying to illustrate something specifically, even if it seems out of order.
Yeah. I think the most important thing about playing music is communicating with your audience. I think it's an instrument to socialize. It's an instrument to give ideas to other people. With instrumental music, you have to become more animated because you don't have the words to help you. You can tell somebody a story and oh, that's wonderful. I'm glad to hear that story. But in my case, growing up as an instrumentalist, I actually try to figure out a way to tell you a story without words. And I have to be more of a joker or more of a dramatic character on stage, I'll do it. Because, I have things to say, and I just want you to see me. Whatever I'm telling you is still your interpretation. It's not mine. I'm going to suggest ideas, but that's the beauty of it. It will touch people differently. People will interpret it different, and they can make their own mind about it. Yeah, we do it in Velvet Caravan a lot, and we also go back and forth between each other because we like each other, and it's an opportunity to enjoy each other's company on stage and see what we come up with and see how we push each other in different directions. It's all kinds of levels, and I think the audience sees that and enjoys it too, to see how the musicians in the band are working it out.
It seems that the passion that you bring, the classical music passion that you bring to the Velvet Caravan is much like what I presume you would bring to a Baroque performance.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's me. This past concert that I did with the Philharmonic, we did Mozart, and I thought that Peter Shannon did a great job at interpreting Mozart, much so like a Baroque musician, and he got out of the orchestra an intensity and a power that is unusual for a large orchestra like this. Interesting enough, I went out in the audience and I talked to several people, and I always make an effort to do that. I always want to break the barrier between audience and orchestra, so I'm the first one that is there before the concert talking to people in the lobby, or I go to intermission, I go into the audience.
Or passing people on the street. Here comes Ricardo. He says, "You're going in the wrong direction."
Grab you by the arm and take you back. Huh? I heard this weekend, it was nice, this couple that I don't know, they were taking a selfie, so I jumped in and photobombed the selfie. And then they were laughing, and they appreciated that, and they said that they're always watching me. They like the way I move within the orchestra. They think I'm very animated. And I also got that from the mother of a young lady that plays music. The mother came up to me at the lobby and said that my daughter's always watching you. She loves how you move when you play. I try to bring that energy everywhere with me, even if it's a wedding that I'm playing. I don't care.
You've talked about Baroque music. You talked about Mozart, which is sort of classical period music. Then, of course, you play Romantic period music.
Which is not my favorite, by the way. Of all the periods, it's not my favorite stuff. I really jump from Baroque and classical all the way to modern classical music. I think the whole drag everything for hours to tell me something, it bores me to death. I guess I'm more down to the point, factual person. As a person, I just tell me what your problem is and let's talk about it. Don't write me a book of 500 pages. So the whole Romantic period artistically never really fit in with me. There's some beautiful stuff. I love a lot of the stuff that Mahler did and Brahms. There's a lot of beautiful music by Tchaikovsky and all that. But I went seriously, in my preference, I went from Mozart and Haydn and Beethoven to Prokofiev and Stravinsky, which are the neoclassical composers. And a little bit of the French guys, Ravel and Debussy, a little bit of that, especially the orchestral stuff and some of chamber music. But after that, I mean, I just really got into just more modern, contemporary, weird stuff, which always, to me, it is always pointing back to Baroque. It's a lot of more of a gestures. Pieces are smaller, matter of fact, and let's move on.
Now, I'm going to become psychotherapist, and I say, maybe one of the first pieces you had to prepare was a Mahler, and maybe that was an early trauma.
But funny enough, 14 years old, I discovered Mahler. I had that album at the house. Every time coming back from school, that's the first thing I played was Mahler. So I would listen, play Mahler, and eat lunch, and then just start practicing. And I loved it. I really did. But as I grew older, it wasn't my preference. Of course, I had to train, and I had to play Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto, Brahms Violin Concerto, Mendelssohn, blah, blah, all the Frank sonatas and Beethoven sonatas, all that stuff is very, very passionate and very, romantic. But I mean, nowadays, even in my writing style, it's always very Prokofiev / Baroque and just simple, matter of fact, and it's what's in my ear.
I guess you write for your sensibility, and your sensibility is much more Baroque because of the passion involved, and the cognitive seems to be much more 21st century.
Yeah, and you see how it happens is in Baroque music, there's a lot of improvisation. All music was based in improvisation. Look at the music that I'm doing now, the majority of it is improvisation too. So there's some similarities to that type of music, even though it's not the same genre. But all the pieces, like the gypsy jazz stuff that I do and the jazz tunes that I do, they're not 8-minute, 9-minute songs. They're 3.5, 4 minutes. Move on. I already said what I had to say. You already heard my solo. I don't need to sit here and do a 5-minute solo. In jazz music and the jazz music that I like, I also go away from that. My favorite jazz music is the one that is just concise, matter of fact.
As an orchestral musician, are there special techniques or special things you have to consider when you're doing, say, Baroque music in an orchestra versus classical versus romantic versus 20th century?
Yeah, you have to make educated decisions for sure in style. The way you use your bow, the way you use your vibrato. I'll use the vibrato as a good example. And vibrato is when you are moving your finger back and forth in order to create that oscillation. Yeah, sure. Yep. So the vibrato is this. It's when you hear a note. This is a note with no vibrato. So you hear the pure tone here. When you start doing this, it's when you start hearing that vibration, and modern music uses that a lot, and that vibrato really started in the Romantic period with the development of the opera, and the singers became more powerful, and then the concert halls were bigger. But before that, in Baroque music, you get musica retorica, which is just more about speaking and giving you ideas. So vibrato back then was just a ornament. So you would have a melody. Then you would add vibrato here and there. So it's more little things happening. So I would decide where I want to add the vibrato just as an ornament. Where a classical musician would play something like that, like. So it's more of that operatic singing, trying to project to the end of the hall. The Baroque guy would be more. So it's more personal, intimate. So that's one technique that you have to keep in mind. Now, classical musicians, of course, you get the Baroque period, the classical period in that order, Romantic period, and then the post-Romantic and neoclassical after that. musicians all the way through Brahms were Baroque musicians. So they play like that. It's not till Schubert and really when things got really loud and then people started playing different. So you're still in the classical period playing Mozart symphonies and things like that. You still have to have that Baroque mentality of performance. And that's a mistake that I think a lot of people make in modern times, that they play Mozart from the modern perspective, which is wimpy. Very wimpy, very stylistically appropriate, very beautiful. But Mozart was schizophrenic, and it's on his music. And two measures are crazy, the next two measures are very quiet and very nice. I mean, in one melody, he would have different personalities, and then his personality would come out. And that you should play it like that. And I think that's how we played when we did the concert in the Philharmonic. That's why I like the interpretation that Peter Shannon did, because he really pushed to make those contrasts and really play with a lot of black and white.
The other thing you see in Baroque music a lot that you don't see anywhere else are trills.
Oh, yeah.
As ornamentation.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're written in.
Right.
And sometimes they seem to occur just sporadically.
And there's their treatise about how to ornament. Again, that's just somebody's interpretation of what it should be. A trill, it's an ornament on a note, so instead of doing, so you do that ornamentation. Usually done on a cadence. Interesting enough, I use a lot of trills in Baroque in gypsy music. But it's also, you got the gypsies coming from that tradition of music. It's like romantic period didn't go through the gypsies. They went straight from Baroque to what they do now. So you just add all those little trills to get more beautiful instead of... embellishing things and making it more beautiful.
And it was really interesting, and I'm sure Peter Shannon did as good as he could with the orchestra. When you got that comparison of how a romantic composer treats gypsy music and really gypsy style music, that comparison is just very dramatic. And I have to say, I do like the Brahms Hungarian Rhapsodies, but when you compare an orchestral presentation of that with true gypsy music, as it was done in the concert last year, Brahms is lacking, at least in my opinion.
Right. But again, he's composing for big orchestra and big halls, and then it's a way to compose for small groups. The smaller the group, the more details that you can do. Or the larger the ensemble and the larger the venue, then the less you have to do. I love the dances, but it's interesting to hear an arrangement of a Hungarian dance for a small group, what you can get out of it, more than hearing the whole Hungarian dance with the orchestra. You can really get more sense of gypsiness with a smaller group, obviously.
And I have to admit, with the Hungarian dance that was done during that performance.
You mean the Velvet Caravan?
Yeah, with the Velvet Caravan performance with the orchestra.
Oh, yeah, when we interrupt the orchestra.
And would you interrupt the orchestra? Now that made it much more interesting, I have to admit.
It was like, and these dirty gypsies playing through. Yeah, that was fun. It was in a certain part of the piece. It's only for 4 measures that we play the melody, and then that you can hear, it's like, oh yeah, I know what tune you're doing, let me do it too. It's a good comparison, and that was fun to do.
It was really interesting. One thinks of orchestral conductors as being stern, restrictive, but Peter Shannon seems to be very open to new interpretations.
No, he's stern.
Oh, he is?
but he's looking for something different, and that's great. He's looking for a different interpretation, and he has all the rights to do it, and he's making educated decisions. Sometimes I don't agree with him, but that's for me to judge, and he's the conductor. But he's very stern about those ideas, and he makes the orchestra do it. And something that not a lot of conductors do. I mean, they're either too polite or they just don't want to fight the orchestra. Some people like it, some people don't like it. I mean, I happen to like it.
You're listening to Music Local and Sustainable, and I'm your host, Dave Lake. Tonight, we have in the studio Ricardo Ochoa. The variety of conductors that you've worked with through the years, you tend to like the conductor who's a little bit more forceful, stern, has what they want to do in mind, and has the orchestra do that.
Yeah, that's the type of conductor I like. I don't like conductors that make everything sound like every recording that you hear. They're probably playing it safe. The piece doesn't have personality. I mean, there are conductors that are really good at putting the piece together, which means that all the entrances are right. The relationship between the first violin and the flute is perfect. All that is just, it's nice. Very polite, sort of conducting. But they don't challenge the orchestra. They don't challenge the musicians within the orchestra. And I prefer that the conductor that is maybe not as perfect as in the technique of putting together certain things, but really gets passion out of the orchestra and gets that energy that is unusual, and it makes it an unusual concert.
And how is that accomplished?
You mean, how do a conductor would accomplish that? Huh?
During a rehearsal, I think everybody can sort of sense how a conductor would get instruments to play together.
Right.
I mean, go over it and go over it and go over it until they get it the way exactly, perfectly together.
Yeah.
But how would, say, Peter Shannon work with the orchestra to develop a new way of thinking about that music and a new passion?
He spends a lot of time explaining himself on rehearsal, and then he sings a lot of the times to explain himself. I mean, that's his way, and then he tries to explain how he moves. But I think in general the best way to do it is just with good body language and good body technique. I think you can get a lot out of the orchestra by having the right way of moving your hands. You know, when you're conducting, you get your right hand is just usually beating the tempo. Your left hand is dynamics and interpretation. So they're completely independent hands. And it's difficult. It's difficult just two hands have to show not only entrances for people to come in a certain spot, but how you want them to sound with that melody and how you want them to get all the information out of your hands. There's facial expression, sure, and some body language, but you're not supposed to move your body too much. It's only your arms. It's difficult to be a conductor. There's a lot of information that you have to tweak with those arms. I studied a little bit of conducting when I was in school, but I was never attracted to it. Yeah, I do that with Velvet Caravan. I'm playing violin and I'm looking at them and just changing feels, and if we're going to decide to get really quiet or we're going to decide to jump or make something happen, then my body's communicating to the guys, and they do the same. So we know where we're going. Body language is good, the way to do it.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that your primary interest back when you were going to school was to be an orchestral musician. And you've moved away from that as your most important thing that you want to do. When did that occur?
It happened here in Savannah. I moved here for the symphony in 2000. And as you know, in the spring of 2003, the orchestra closed and we all lost our jobs. So the only option feasible there, that I had to continue to audition to find another job in a different city and or travel from orchestra to orchestra in the region in order to make a living. I didn't want to do any of those two. At this time already, I was getting fed up with the whole orchestra world. And the professional world is just different than the dream world that you think the orchestra is. And up to that point, I've been doing so many auditions that I didn't want to do more auditions. I was just done with that. So it occurred to me that I should start a company that provides live music for private events. At that time, nobody was really truly organized here. There were people getting the calls for a wedding and things like that, or for a private event. There were other entertainment companies from Hilton Head doing their work. So I decided I'm going to organize a group of 30 to 40 musicians and start this company. And I did, and it's still working. And I have a business partner, Kristen King, and we do over 300 events a year. I started that because then I started getting jobs to do cocktail hours and things like that. So I was like, well, it's a good opportunity for me to hire a really good jazz guitarist or a pianist and a bass player, and then just go play a cocktail hour. And he would start by just reading the charts or the songs, and then they could take all the solos. So it slowly I evolved into improvising more and more and getting into the style of every song. But I think it was because I was hiring such amazing musicians, to play with me, and they couldn't complain about my performance because they were getting paid well. I started evolving into that, and I just really like those guys a lot better than the jaded classical musicians that were always fighting, always complaining and things like that. The jazz guys were happy to be playing and enjoying themselves, and became more open to that whole thing. And as soon as I started improvising, I started hanging out with all the guys at a barbecue place, and somebody would have a guitar. I start playing with them and trying to play beautiful songs with them. And it evolved to the point that I like that environment a lot more than I like the classical environment in general anymore.
I was listening to the recording of In for a Penny and said, man, that's a great fiddle player. So when I talked to Sean, I said, oh, that's Ricardo Ochoa.
Yeah, I have fun doing that album too. I love when people call me and they ask me to fill in for them. And In for a Penny is a Irish punk band, and I do like punk music. And one of my favorite bands is Gogo Bordello, which is gypsy punk, and they do have a really great fiddle player, which is one of the founders of the band and writers of the music in the band too. So when Sean called me, I was like, yeah, of course I'll do it. And so I had a lot of fun doing that. I'll do it again.
Of the Velvet Caravan numbers, what would be most representative of your composition that you're proudest of? Or what is the best illustration of you as a violinist?
I think the song Margaret is the one that always strikes me as the more personal tune. It has that Spanish flavor. I think it's something that people like, and they like the feel. I think that's what I think it would represent me the most. Can't wait for you to hear the new stuff that is coming up, and we're going to be working
portions of it because you've performed works both in terms of full orchestration, but in the band as well is going to be eventually on the new album.
Yeah. Well, the news with the new album is that just recently Sasha has decided to pursue some more of his medical career. So we lost him, and we have been working with Jackson Evans here in town a little bit. And he just recently bought a acoustic gypsy guitar, so he's all excited about that. But we're also going to be working with a guitarist from New York. His name Tim Clement. And he's going to go on tour with us in December. And then eventually in February, we're going to be working with Jimmy Grant from San Francisco. And he's going to be here in Savannah for a month with us. And we're going to do 2 tours with him. And we're going to do our performance here, our spring performance in Savannah. It's going to be on February 16th. You're the first one to know, by the way. We haven't even announced that. We're going to do it with him. Those guys are going to bring new elements to the band and new tunes. And the band is just progressing into this new thing. Jimmy Grant is a true gypsy guitarist, graduated from Berkeley, a tremendous guitarist. We're sad to lose Sasha, but at the same time, it's opening the opportunity for new things and a new direction. The new songs are going to be really, really interesting. I've been actually in contact with members of the Venezuelan Symphony. So I might be doing some orchestrations for some of the new songs, and we'll have the Venezuelan Symphony on the album. It'll be a lot of fun. The album is going to be very, very beefy. It's going to have a lot of good stuff in it.
Yeah, really, really looking forward to that new album. So we've had Ricardo Ochoa on the show tonight. And Ricardo, I want to thank you so very much for coming on tonight.
Thank you very much, Dave. Appreciate it.
This has been another edition of Music Local and Sustainable, and I've been your host, Dave Lake. Save this time for another show next week.
Well, I know we ain't headed for the Hall of Fame. We're gonna give it what we got, man, that ain't no shame. Let me know if you can hear me. Check, check, 1, 2. Let me know if you can hear me. Check, check, 1, 2.